I used to scour everywhere, trying to get financial advice, tips, tactics, strategies from anywhere I could. And often what I was left with was this. I would find different types of accounts and learn about them, whether they were 529s, 401ks, IRAs, brokerage accounts. I'd go out and I'd find different investment strategies, whether it was stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs. I'd think about different tax planning strategies and I'd research them. But I would always come back to the same thing. They never actually applied to me because there was always just one caveat in my life. Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Turner, former Major League Baseball player and current co-founder of Moment Private Wealth. In today's video, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm actually going to answer 5 questions that I found on Reddit. Now, Reddit has an incredible resource of personal finance, and the thing that's going to be really cool about walking through these scenarios specifically is they're real people's lives. So we're going to be able to talk through how I would think about it. So here's the first question. Is it worth paying a financial advisor? And here's the specific question that they posted on Reddit. Is it worth paying more for a personal financial advisor? I have just $40,000 and I'm adding $9,000 per year. They have a 401k and an IRA. It looks like they're constantly contributing to the Roth IRA every year, maxing out at $7,000, and they're putting an additional $9,000 in their 401k that could be going up. They have about 25 years to retirement. And this question has a lot of intricacies to it because I would say there's no right or wrong answer to this question. What I will say is that not everybody needs a financial advisor. This is coming from a financial advisor myself. And I'm going to outline this in terms of how I thought about it when I hired a financial advisor. I was in a situation where I had a ton of knowledge around personal finance. I really enjoyed it. I liked following it. I was very up to date on what my personal financial situation was. But I still hired a financial advisor. And really, it came down to a couple different things for me. One, I wasn't going to be able to stay up to date on all the different aspects of it. And this wasn't just the investment portfolio or what my cash flow looked like, but it was the tax planning. It was the estate planning. It was all the risk management things that come into play. My life had gotten to a point where, from a complexity standpoint, I felt like there was additional value above and beyond any fee I was paying a financial advisor to have a second set of eyes on that. Secondarily, the other big thing that I looked at in my situation was the cost that I'm paying a financial advisor. Is it worth paying that cost to make sure that I continue to do the right things and that I don't blow it up? That's literally was my thought. And for me, it was huge, right? Like I knew that if I made one big mistake, it could legitimately cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, okay? For me, making sure that I didn't make that mistake by having somebody on my team that was unemotional was really, really valuable. So for me, it made sense. Now, in this situation, what I would say is it could make sense to hire somebody on a one-off basis to get an initial plan in place if you feel confident and comfortable moving forward. It could also make sense to potentially hire somebody more on a subscription model where they're not charging an assets under management because you don't have a ton of assets today. And you're also getting things like cash flow planning and tax planning. You're getting help with your estate plan. You're getting help with your risk management. What I would say in this situation, though, is if you're just going to go out and hire a quote unquote financial advisor to help you manage your investment portfolio in this scenario, it's probably not worth it. Question 2, when is it not a good idea to have a Roth IRA? All right, so before we talk about this question, let's just outline again what a Roth IRA is. A Roth IRA is what is called an individual retirement account. And that Roth prefix before it just simply means that when you contribute to that account, you're not going to get a tax benefit in the given year, but you are going to get a tax benefit in the future. The money that you put in there grows tax-free, and when you go to take it out in retirement, it comes out tax-free. It's also not subject to RMDs or required minimum distributions. So said another way, it's a really valuable account. So this is an interesting question they're posing. They're saying, is there ever not a time that it makes sense to not contribute to it? So this great account, should I not contribute to it? He goes on to outline, I'm in a high cost of living area. I make $100,000 before deductions. I take home about $55,000. I'm 34 and will hopefully have a pension and be able to collect Social Security in retirement. I have a 401k with some company match. Is there ever a situation it's not a good idea for me to have a Roth IRA? And where I think this question really leads to is having what's called an order of operations. And when I say an order of operation, it just simply means this. Every single one of us out there makes a different amount of money. Every single one of us out there has different goals in mind. But every single one of us should have what's called an order of operations. That is it says, if I'm going to save money, here's how much I'm looking to save. And then what order of operation should I be saving that money into in terms of the accounts that I'm putting that money into? Now, I'm going to give my own personal situation of what I do with my money to help give you better context on this question. What I do is I contribute first and foremost to my company 401k, but I only contribute up to the company match. And the reason for that is pretty simple. I want to make sure that I'm collecting that free money from the company match, but I'm not going to continue contributing above and beyond that. My next contributions are going to my HSA account. My HSA is my health savings account. It's the only triple tax benefit account out there. After that, my next group of savings is going to my Roth IRA. So just like we talked about here, very valuable account. It's number 3 on my order of operation. After that, typically I'm contributing to a taxable brokerage account. So that's what my order of operations looks like. So to answer this question more specifically, I think it really depends on 1, how much money you're saving, 2, what is your order of operations, and 3, understanding how valuable a Roth IRA really is. This individual is 34 years old. So that means that they're most likely going to have about 3 decades to let that money continue to compound before they would take it out at quote unquote normal retirement age around 65. This could be immensely valuable for their future retirement. So what I would say is it should be a really key part of potentially your order of operation. Our third question dives into a topic that it feels like everywhere I look, people are talking about. It's housing costs. And more specifically, the question is, should I pay 30% of my income or on rent before or after taxes? They go on to say, I've heard the rule, don't want to spend more than 30% of your income on rent before taxes, but it seems better to use what I pocket at home after taxes for my 30% calculation. What do you guys think? First and foremost, let me say this. The rules of thumb are great. They're great starting points, but it doesn't mean that that's where you should end. In this specific scenario, what I'd say is we always want to focus on what the after-tax take-home pay is when we're looking at any sort of expenditures, whether it's paying for rent, paying for other housing costs, food, groceries, whatever it may be. We always want to be looking at our after-tax take-home. And the reason for this is kind of simple. If you're working in California and you're making $150,000 a year versus if you're working in the state of Florida and you're making $150,000 a year, you're both making the same amount of money, but your after-tax take-home is going to be tens of thousands of dollars different just based on state taxes alone. In addition to that, how people do tax planning, different accounts they're contributing to, different contributions, donations, et cetera, they're maybe making, outside income, all those things are going to affect what their total tax rate is. And that's why whenever we're going to start with a rule of thumb, which is not a bad place to start, we need to be thinking about our after-tax take-home, not our pre-tax amount. So in this scenario, I think 30% is a really reasonable amount to be thinking about on an after-tax basis to be paying for your total housing costs, whether that's renting or buying. The one caveat I would add to that is make sure you understand what your total housing costs are. Now, if you're renting, it might just be the rent, renter's insurance. That's usually about it. If you're owning a home, this includes everything. Okay. This is going to include insurance, property taxes, maintenance, mortgage, all that stuff. So make sure you're including everything that goes into this calc. Our next question dives into education costs, which are on the top of a lot of people's minds these days because college costs in general have just been skyrocketing in recent years. And the question is this. It's regarding 529 contributions. Now, a 529 is an educational account that you can use for future educational expenses. The benefit of a 529 is depending on the state that you're in, you might get a state tax deduction. The money grows tax-free and comes out tax-free if used for qualified educational expenses. So let's dive into the question. He says, we want to start contributing to a 529 for our 2-year-old. Only one kid and not planning on more. We live in Georgia and are thinking to contribute at least $8,000 per year since this is the state tax deduction amount. We will contribute either bi-weekly or monthly. I want to ask if there is any other alternative to consider and what are the other factors we should keep in mind. Also, what are the potential disadvantages, if any, of a 529 versus just investing in a normal taxable brokerage account in like VOO and QQQ, which we have full control of? I know the tax benefit, but was wondering if there's any drawback to consider. Thanks in advance. P.S. We can afford to put up to $15,000 per year, but not sure if that is a good idea given the limits. Now, this is an interesting question. I think it goes to this idea that there's not a ton of like hard and fast rules in personal finance. And that's simply because more often than not, your personal financial situation is going to be slightly different than somebody else's. It goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning of this video, that we can learn all we want about 529s, but when it comes to your specific situation, how we might contribute to it might be different. In this scenario, a couple things that I would think about is the one big downside of a 529 is if you don't use the money and you go to take it out outside of qualified educational expenses, you're going to be paying a 10% penalty. Okay. So there's really big downsides to potentially taking it out and not using it for education. One thing that I see happen quite often is somebody overfunds a 529. What I mean by overfund is they put too much money in, their child goes to college or maybe doesn't go to college. And if they do go to college, they're getting a scholarship, they're getting some sort of school paid for in a certain way, and now they have more money in their 529 than what they planned on. They don't spend it all. Now, with some of the new tax law changes here just recently, folks are able to take some of that money and then move it to a Roth IRA for that child in the future. So potentially a big benefit there. The other thing that you could potentially do is you can create more of like a generational family educational account. And the way that you do this is you would change the beneficiary of that account in the future. Maybe it goes to a grandkid in the future. But really, remember, the goal of us putting money in the 529 was for the person that we put it in there for actually using it for educational expenses. So I think most people should do a combination of the two. I love the idea of what I'm doing personally, which is I have money in a 529, but I also have money in a taxable brokerage account. I'm combining the two and saying at some point, I'm going to be pulling from the 529 for educational expenses, but I also have some money earmarked over here in my taxable brokerage account that if I need money above and beyond what I have in my 529, it's earmarked for those educational expenses. The reason I like that is it helps me to avoid on one side potentially overfunding those 529s. It also gives me the flexibility that let's say something comes up and I want to be able to use that money for something else. It's not tied up. It's not locked down, that 529. Now, one factor to consider is because I have this kind of 1-2 punch with the educational expenses, on the second side, that taxable brokerage account, I'm not getting the tax benefits that I might get from a 529. But let's remember this. Tax benefits are great, but we need to understand what strategy we want to utilize in the future before we ever start thinking about tax. All right, our last question is one that's a little near and dear to my heart. It's using insurance as an investment. So let's dive into the question. Is it smart to use an IUL as a tax reduction retirement strategy? Now, an IUL stands for an index universal life policy. It's a type of permanent life insurance that people can use. And typically what it looks like is you put money in, some of that cost goes towards the cost of life insurance. The other portion of that cost goes towards the investment vehicles that are inside of that. Typically it's some sort of index basis, which what it means is you typically have a floor, so you're not going to lose a certain amount of money, but typically you have a cap on how much you can earn. So in this situation, he says, my wife and I are just under 30 and make $350,000 combined. Both cars are paid off. We have a mortgage under $3,000 and no other debt. We both have a 30-year term life insurance policy. Both are matching our 401ks, have a Roth IRA that we can no longer fund. Interesting. And I have a pension. Our financial advisor recommended I take out an IUL as another vehicle to save for retirement. I've listened to multiple podcasts and read about IULs and understand them reasonably well. I know they get a lot of hate, but I can see a good upside in using one as another way to save. Am I being misled by my... Well, let's talk about a couple things. First and foremost, one thing to note in here is he says that he can't contribute to a Roth IRA. And he is correct that he can't directly contribute to it. But if he can do what's called a backdoor Roth IRA strategy, that would be something that would definitely be worth looking into. And what that simply means is it's a way for high income earners, people that are making $350,000 combined, to be able to still contribute to a Roth IRA. And the reason why that'd be really valuable is in this situation, they're just under 30 years old. They have a lot of life left to live. It would be an incredible amount of compounding, tax-free, and could potentially come out tax-free in retirement if they could make those backdoor Roth IRA contributions. So that's one caveat to this. The second thing is, should they use an IUL? And I think a lot of this depends on the situation, but let's understand what an IUL really is meant for. It's insurance. It's index universal life insurance. Okay, it's not index universal life investment. It's index universal life The biggest mistake that I see people make is this. They confuse insurance with an investment vehicle. And oftentimes we're always thinking about the tax benefits that maybe insurance. The reality is insurance does provide tax benefits. It also comes with relatively significant costs. So a couple things that I would point to here is that saving for retirement doesn't always have to be in tax advantage accounts like 401ks, Roth IRAs, any of those accounts. They're all great, but typically what it looks like for high earners, people like this that are making $350,000 or more, they start contributing to what's called a taxable brokerage account. Now, a taxable brokerage account is one that you're going to have flexibility to take the money out whenever you want. You're not going to have restrictions on it like those tax advantage retirement accounts. You're not going to get the tax benefits up front or down the road like you're going to get in some of those retirement accounts, but it can be a fabulous way to save for retirement. You're also going to be able to keep your costs really low. The second thing that I would look at is I would just ask the advisor, hey, if I buy this policy through you, how much money are you making on this policy? And the reality is you should be paying for the financial advice you're getting. If you're getting good advice, if you're getting good service in any aspect of life, it's going to cost money. It's just really important to understand how much is it actually going to cost. Because what I'll say is oftentimes insurance is oversold. And the reason why it's oversold, it's sold because tax benefits sound really cool. It's also sold because the people that are selling it are typically making a decent amount of money, sometimes a lot of money selling you that policy. You just want to make sure that you're educated and informed before you buy it, because the reality is once you buy it, you really need to stick with whatever strategy you're doing. I say this about everything, whether it's investments or insurance. If we're going to do the strategy, the worst thing you can do is do it and then 3 years later realize, man, that was not a good fit for me, because there's going to be costs involved with getting out of it. There might be some tax consequences involved with getting out of it. So you need to really understand what you're getting. I hope you found this valuable. We talked about everything from the cost of paying a financial advisor, is it worth it, to 529 strategies, to IULs and how they could play out in retirement. And if you like this sort of thing, make sure you leave a comment below in terms of what questions would you like to see answered. I would love to be able to talk more in big picture about certain specific situations. And while we're not giving specific financial advice here, I do think it's really helpful to hear the context in which I think about these questions, because nearly every question that we talked about today and every question that you probably have is something that I've thought about in my own life. And I love to come to it with the lens of how am I thinking about this? And it might help you better solve that. So if you're into this sort of thing, make sure you like and subscribe for future videos, and let's get smarter with our